Well, hello, everybody. I'm looking forward to chatting with all of you. And like my colleagues, I want to start off by thanking the Office of Community Partnerships for their outstanding support from beginning to finish, especially Carly and Julia with helping with logistics and ideas and troubleshooting in particular. Whoops, Daisy. This is not supposed to go that far. One moment. Back, please. I also want to acknowledge the contributions of my community partners, who primarily were Proyecto Mole, Washington Sin Fronteras, and also Mi Centro, which was formerly Centro Latino here in Tacoma. And like Cassie, I had originally been working on this project with Dr. Jimmy McCarty, who is no longer here at UW-T, but I want to be sure to acknowledge his efforts throughout the proposal process in particular and the work that we had done prior to thinking about putting forth our application. So just as some background, in anticipation of the June 2020 Supreme Court ruling regarding DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, UW-T leadership recognized the need for creating infrastructure to support students who are undocumented, who are DACA recipients, or just from mixed status families in a more coordinated way. And so I had the pleasure of co-chairing with Jimmy McCarty, and then later chairing, a working group that brought together staff, faculty, students, alumni who are now deeply invested in community partners' work to do an assessment of what service provision was currently being provided, what resources were available here on our campus and in the community, and to help figure out what some actionable recommendations would be in the short, mid, and long term moving forward to support these students. I currently serve as the chair of the implementation team, so our work is ongoing. The OCP Faculty Fellows Program really allowed us to continue and expand our initiatives with respect to implementing the various recommendations of that group. And I think it provided the much needed foundation and also the momentum for moving it forward to build out these resources and support for this unique student population here at UW-T and beyond in the years to come. So, like I said, our working group focused on assessment of what was currently available, and we had subcommittees that specifically consulted with UW units about their current service delivery and programs or initiatives, and assessed programs and services at peer institutions, observed best practices, brought all sorts of research together to provide and prioritize recommendations around these 5 areas: campus support and advocacy, legal support, financial and administrative support, community-based engagement, or strengthening our connections with our partners in the community who are doing work with these groups of students and their families, and communication protocols. So what do we mean when we're talking about undocumented students? I think there's a bit of misinformation out there. Essentially, it's a foreign national who entered the US without inspection. In many cases, this could be a child who is eligible for DACA, well, now an adult, who had come here without status, was brought here by a family member. Sometimes our students have entered legally, but then have overstayed a visa, for example, and so their status is no longer legal. Most undocumented students nationally have lived in the US for most of their lives, have learned English, have gone through the K-12 systems, and want to pursue a college education. And importantly, many lack a legal pathway to become residents or citizens. We are very fortunate in Washington State that there are policies and structures in place to support these students. Just to get a sense of, the bigger picture in numbers, there are currently 611,000 or so active DACA recipients. What this means is that these students are able to get a 2-year basically a deferral of any sort of removal proceedings, but they're also eligible to work legally in the US, and also I think, so in Washington, we do have systems in place that I can discuss later in terms of state funding as an alternative to the federal funding, FAFSA, for which all undocumented students are ineligible. But there are large numbers of students in the US who would like to go on to college, but are having to face barriers getting into college and then remaining in college, particularly from what we found with our work at UW-T. So as a snapshot of Washington, there are about 15,000 students who have self-identified as undocumented in higher ed, and about 2,000 graduating from high school each year in Washington state schools. This is some old data. This is from 2017, but pertains to the University of Washington in particular. And they identified 456 undocumented students, either by self-reporting or through WASFA applications for the 3 campuses combined. Our registrar here at UW Tacoma estimates that they are currently between 100 and 125 students who are undocumented or DACA recipients on our campus. And that is expected to continue growing because in our surrounding community, we're seeing growth in the K-12 schools and in assistance to navigate to move through higher education. In case you're interested in knowing a bit more about the differentiation between students who have DACA or are documented, undocumented, or families from mixed legal status, I'll leave those up there while I continue chatting. But I do want to return to sort of UW-T's working group because of how that informed how we move forward with this particular project. First of all, the overlap in the subcommittee's recommendations really demonstrated both the inherent difficulty of separating these inextricably linked elements and the working group's recognition of the urgency to develop more comprehensible and visible resources on our campus to create and centralize consistent and accurate information regarding available services and resources both on and off campus, and to develop formal protocols for sharing updates pertaining to policy changes, the presence of, say, Customs and Border Protection or ICE here on campus, and other relevant information for students and faculty and staff. So as work continues to develop institutional strategies and infrastructure, we recognize that it's imperative to privilege our students' voices. And what we heard from them, loud and clear, is that UW-T needs to develop a staff position that is dedicated with a focus on supporting undocumented students or students from mixed status families. And they also emphasize the importance of providing paid opportunities for current undergrads here, whether that be for research, for internships, for student positions, because those have largely been restricted. Given budget constraints that we're all familiar with, a full-time staff line just wasn't feasible for the foreseeable future. However, in response to these recommendations and with the generous help of OCP faculty fellows, we were able to create a brand new part-time undergraduate undocumented peer advising position, which is fantastic. So one of the elements that was important both to the recommendation for a full-time staff position and this particular position was to ensure that the individual coming into this role has lived experience as a DACA recipient or as somebody who's undocumented and is very familiar with the assets and challenges that go along with that. So in her capacity as our Undocu peer advisor, Perla Vasquez held weekly virtual and in-person drop-in hours to answer questions related to WASFA applications, to finding employment on campus, to scholarship opportunities, you name it, any sorts of questions she would be fielding. She also created the UW-T Monarchs United RSO, in winter of 2022 to establish a safe environment and a supportive place where students could build community, particularly students who are undocumented, who are DACA recipients, who have, in some way have had immigration touch their lives. Leading the efforts in collaboration with this RSO, our funded UndocuPeer advisor, also organized various events in spring of 2022, including a Know Your Rights workshop led by Washington Sin Fronteras, and also Undocu Career Week, which featured different panels, one of which was about how our students have the professional opportunities to work as independent contractors, regardless of whether they have a social security number, which is what in large part impedes their ability to work legally. One of the bits of feedback we've gotten from students and alumni is that they're excited and they feel supported while they're here at UW-T, but they don't feel like they know what options they have after graduating, which in some part leads to retention issues for students who don't see the purpose. And we found that these communities were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Many students stopped out primarily because they were needing to attend to family obligations and helping with work, and also thinking through, well, what will a degree get me? Am I able to work in the area that I've been studying, for example, afterwards? So they've been able to bring in sometimes UW-T alumni to come and discuss the opportunities with them. One of our primary goals with this project, though, was to leverage our community assets by better connecting UW-T students with community organizations that are already supporting students or immigrants and their families, and importantly, fostering a sense of trust and connectedness to UW-T among middle and high school students and their families, and also students at South Puget Sound community colleges, many of whom might consider coming to UW-T. So to that end, our UndocuPeer advisor assisted with Proyecto Mole. There were certain events in April and September of this past year, specifically things like Senior Saturday that include workshops and such to help these students and their families figure out how to navigate higher ed opportunities or post-secondary opportunities. Earlier this month, she and the RSO partnered with Washington Sin Fronteras once again, this time to organize, host, and participate in Beyond Papers, We Rise and Thrive. This is really exciting. It was an all-day workshop with sessions focused on knowing your rights. They invited UW-Seattle's Student Legal Services to come in and give a presentation. They, again, focused on post-graduation employment opportunities as independent contractors. They had sessions on mindfulness, community building, and more, and this is something they're hoping to continue doing. And thankfully, this was possible because of funding through this Faculty Fellows program. She and the RSO are now partnering with Mi Centro to plan civic engagement workshops in connection with Mi Centro's Dolores Huerta Institute, and these will be specifically geared toward UW-T students, but held at their location. But that's not all. So she's also been really busy conducting research, and in spring 2022, she presented how to support undocumented students at UW-Tacoma to an audience of UW-T students, faculty, and staff, and facilitated discussions regarding potential solutions to some of the issues that her colleagues had raised. During the summer and the autumn, she met with me weekly and researched peer-reviewed articles about how best to support these students, best practices, what student support initiatives are out there. And she also added to an online compilation of resources that she had been working on of various community-based and national opportunities for our students. And I'm happy to report, what you can see down on the bottom here, is that she has been contributing input for the overhaul, the much needed overhaul of UW-T's outdated website related to undocumented students, which is currently live and was last updated in 2020 with a letter from a colleague who is no longer at the institution and with broken links. But what I will say is that we can all very much look forward to an overhauled site in the months to come, so keep looking for that. Okay, I'll try to speed through some more. So much got completed with this. One of the outcomes of the project was also that, my colleague here, we were able to create a cost-shared position using the CEI Social Justice Internship Program. And we specifically made an effort to advertise this position as being one available to students regardless of their immigration status, and that it would indeed be paid. Despite our best efforts to recruit, no students came forward with this status, so that enabled us to reallocate our funds to instead utilize them to incentivize student participation in the leadership development and workshops like in the event earlier this month, and also in the spring we'll be able to offer student stipends to UW students who are very much involved in those and participating in them. Another exciting outcome of this project is that we were, with the help of the Office of Financial Aid and the support of the Office of Community Partnerships, able to establish a dedicated fund for legal fees related to immigration issues. And we allocated $2,000 for this fund. We still have some funds left, but we know of at least one student who was able to utilize this funding for a $495 DACA renewal fee. So I don't know if you're aware that for those students who do have DACA, it's something that needs to be renewed every 2 years. And regardless of whether it's authorized or approved, they're still having to pay roughly $500 a pop just to apply. And so that's something that we don't want to be a barrier for our students as they continue. All right, let's see. Finally, our project really drew from and contributed to the conversations and the initiatives related to the various aspects of immigration that are represented among the Office of Community Partnerships Immigration Community of Practice, which is intended to bring together folks from Tacoma, but also the greater South Sound, who are interested in advocacy, who are service providers, who conduct research around immigration, or teach on the topic of immigration and youth, families, school, communities, you name it. And in our quarterly meetings, we were able to address topics that included support for students in higher ed, language access in our K through 12 schools in connection with Washington State House Bill 1153 that passed in last year's legislature, current research coming out of UW Center for Human Rights, and more. So all in all, we were able to accomplish quite a bit in this year, and as I had mentioned, we are so grateful to have had the opportunity to have the funding that enabled us to lay the groundwork to be able to make a compelling case, to be able to obtain external funding to keep this going, and maybe hopefully to get some more internal funding from UW Tacoma as well, so that we can continue to expand resources here on our campus, like student legal services, which we are getting very close to bringing to UW-T as well. So happy to address any questions you may have. Thank you.